morning. Welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast. My name is John, and joining me this morning is a guy who is officially going to Star Wars Celebration 2019. Ryan, what's up, Ryan?
Woo! See you in Chicago in April.
Exactly. Yeah, Ryan sent me the text, and the rest of the Blockade Runners. He sent us the text yesterday saying, like, I'm in. It's official. So I was really excited to hear that. And I can't wait for Star Wars Celebration 2019.
It's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is Memorial Day weekend. In fact, it is Memorial Day, and that means that this is a Star Wars story weekend. And so we're here today to do our second solo reaction show. Ryan is in Denver, saw the movie with Lindsay in Denver, and has not had a chance to talk on the show about his mini thoughts regarding Solo: A Star Wars Story. So it was only local people here in Illinois who were hanging out in that bar and talking about Star Wars or Solo right after the movie came out. So if you haven't gone back or if you haven't listened to that one, that's our most recent episode. Ryan, how was like the music in the background for somebody who wasn't there? Because we got there that night and it was like blasting. We did a Rogue One show at that same place, and we did Last Jedi there too. And I thought those turned out fine. And this one was definitely like, I posted it, but I was like, oh my goodness, the music is blasting. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal, that episode, I feel like.
Yeah. And I'll say the same thing that I said after, I believe it was when you did this episode for The Last Jedi. Like, it feels like a like opening or intermission of a Bright Eyes album where there's just like talking and random noises and you're not really sure. You're coming in like the middle of a conversation and not really knowing what's going on, and you can like hear some people better than others.
Yeah. Well, that's the price you pay for the truly immediate reaction.
No, but I like that. Like, I like listening to that and getting those just like really raw, like before you even have the chance to like go to the internet and read the hot takes and be informed by that, or read the visual guide or like anything else. Like, I like that just raw gut reaction.
Yeah.
I think that's important to have out there.
Yeah, and it'll be nice for, I think, for me to be able to like 10 years from now, like listen to those episodes, be like, what did I think like right when I walked out of the theater? You know? I would love to be able to hear my post Attack of the Clones.
Oh man.
I've brought it up many times on the show before, or Kevin has, but I did walk out of there and say, the only question is it better than Empire? So if there was a recording of that, it'd be wonderful. But speaking of things that are wonderful, Ryan, you had an awesome weekend, Star Wars wise, and got to do a couple of cool things that you had access to out there in Denver that most of us didn't. So why don't you fill us in on your Star Wars themed weekend here?
Yeah, so I was really excited. This is the first time I had actually been able to get opening night, first showing tickets to a Star Wars movie at Alamo Drafthouse in Littleton. Usually, like, those sell out instantly, but I happen to be right on my computer, right when they went on sale, clicked the link, got right into the queue, immediately got to buy my tickets. So, back when it was ticket buying time, that was a May the 4th, right?
Yeah, it was May the 4th. Yep.
Yeah. I bought tickets for Thursday night and then Saturday morning. So Thursday night we went. It was really cool, as you'd kind of expect. Alamo always brings in outside folks, and so there were members of the 501st there, I believe. Lots of cosplay, really, really nice costumes, people like hanging out in the lobby, taking photos, like all of that. Then there was inside the draft house, there was a cardboard Millennium Falcon that was like really nice, really well made. inside the theater itself. And then on Thursday night, the Millennium Falcon Experience was there in the parking lot, but it was not good to go yet. So so we didn't get to check that out Thursday night. But then when we came back on Saturday, that's when we got to do the Millennium Falcon Experience. And I have my little card here. You basically sign up. You go, there's a table next to it. You sign up for a time, get a wristband, and then you get about 1 minute to go hang out inside a pretty faithful recreation of the Millennium Falcon cockpit. It's pretty nice. Like, it's got like metal steering wheels. It's got tons of buttons that you can press and switches you can flick. And it reminds me, as soon as I sat down, like it reminded me of, I think it was an interview with Daisy Ridley for The Force Awakens, when she was like talking with Harrison Ford, and Harrison was like, you can't just sit down here and just start flicking switches. Like, there's there's a certain way you do this. And yeah, so I was thinking about that, and I was like very carefully like trying to choose what switches I
flick those switches in the most authentic way.
Yes. So that was just a really great, cool experience. It was free. Just, an extra treat in addition to the theater going experience.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't realize it was only a minute, but I guess that makes sense with probably a bunch of people wanting to do it.
There were pretty consistent lines the whole time.
Yeah. And a good sneak peek at what it'll be like to be on Batuu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, I guess, hanging out in a Falcon. So that's pretty sweet. And I didn't realize it was going to be at Alamo. That's also really nice. Because
I didn't either.
I thought you were going to have to go to that baseball game, or at least to that stadium, to go to the Falcon.
Yeah.
So
that worked out really well.
Which I don't know if you would have done that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like counterintuitive to your every
it's not very
principle.
On brand.
No, it's not at all. No.
Okay. So and then in addition to that was kind of the big thing. But then in addition to that, there was the typical Birth Movies Death pre-show before each screening, which was as always fantastic. They always like really go all out with their like original video content for Star Wars movies. And then there was a special menu of Solo Cup cocktails, and they were Han Solo themed cocktails, and they were served in a Solo cup.
Very good. Nice.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
And you sampled at least one of those?
I did at 9:30 in the morning on our Saturdays. So yeah.
Well, after hearing your initial reaction to Solo, seems like you needed to try changing up something for the second viewing. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
The 501st were there on Thursday, it sounds like?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not like totally sure of that, but I did see cars in the parking lot with 501st stickers and people in very, very nice costumes. So there's a sneak peek for you of what Celebration is like, because they'll be everywhere, and it'll be really cool. Yeah.
All right. Nice. Well, should we dig into Solo: A Star Wars Story here?
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So we decided that what we're going to do, Ryan has put together a list of his pros and cons, or pluses and minuses, associated with this movie. So we're going to go, we're going to look at the negatives, the minuses first here, and then we'll come back around and talk about the positives, at least from your perspective, Ryan. What are the negatives and the positives? So I don't know how much of that we'll agree on necessarily, but we'll jump into it. Although I guess before we're gonna do that, we're gonna just kind of like briefly touch on our sort of overall reaction to the movie. So why don't you go first? What was your reaction?
Well, I believe my initial quote in text message form, which I did hear announced on the previous episode, was "woof."
Yeah.
That was my initial reaction after coming out of the film. And, you know, I saw like one of my favorite hot takes on the movie that I've seen online so far is someone wrote, someone tweeted, you know, in regards to the iffy box office performance of the film, someone tweeted, of course, the Han Solo movie would be the first Star Wars movie to lose money.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which is very appropriate. And I think about it too, like, of course, the Han Solo movie for me would be the first Star Wars movie that I would walk away from and feel kind of like put off by. Like the initial impression was overall not great. I think I was in a good place for a lot of the movie, and then there was, you know, oh, and we are going to be spoiling stuff. Like,
big time.
Hardcore spoiling. So
yes, everything's on the table.
Definitely stop listening if you don't want to be spoiled. But I think, you know, as soon as the mall moment hit, that just soured me so hardcore. I felt like I was like mostly in a good place, maybe a little tepid throughout, and then that hit, and it was just like really hard for me to like feel good about the movie from that point on. So yeah, I ended up walking out being actually when the mall moment hit, Lindsay turned to me and started laughing because she has heard me for like years complain about Darth Maul coming back in Clone Wars and Rebels. It's like my number one go-to Star Wars complaint. And so when that hit, she just like turned and like stifled a laugh towards me. So I came out feeling pretty sour on the film, and it wasn't until the second viewing where I was able to kind of appreciate it more on its merits.
Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely not one of your favorite Star Wars movies, but it's a developing kind of thing for you, I guess, which is cool. So I've also seen the movie twice. I obviously went, opening night, and then I went again on Saturday night, and had to go to a late show once the kids had gone to sleep and all that stuff. I actually ended up watching the second half of the movie standing up down by the ramp where you walk out of the theater, because I was like falling asleep, which I do.
My goodness.
One of the reasons we record this podcast like early in the morning is because I don't know if we both, but I have trouble staying awake at night for sure.
No, same.
Yeah. So, but it was worth it, and I felt really good about the movie the second time. I mean, I've really enjoyed it the first time too, but I kind of settled in with it the second time, because we talk about this all the time when a new Star Wars movie comes out, but I feel like the first time, like, it's really a shell shock thing, no matter how good or bad it is or whatever. It's just like, whoa, that's a new Star Wars movie that I'm going to be living with for the next, however many years I get to be around for. And, like, it's a lot to take in on the first viewing. So knowing what it is and then seeing it for the second time, the things that I didn't love, I still don't love, but they didn't bother me as much. And then the things that I thought were really good, I was like, I knew some of the jokes were coming. I knew some of the big moments were coming, and I thought they were great. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the movie overall. It's obviously a sort of a smaller scale story, and not as ambitious in some ways, most ways, I guess, as other Star Wars movies. But I kind of knew that would be the case, and as a premise, I like that. I'm fine with that. So that's not really a problem for me. So yeah. So overall, I like it. But let's get into where the movie kind of doesn't hit the mark for you, Ryan.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of preface this because, you know, having a weekend, having a few days to kind of you know, think on the movie, like we have been in pretty much nonstop discussion for 24/7 for the past 3 days about this. I've talked about it a lot with Lindsay. I think a lot of my initial kind of, I guess, like dislike, whatever, for the film, disappointment, maybe. I think some of that is actually kind of on me, because I think I approached this movie going through the typical Star Wars hype cycle of, you know, every time there's an interview, every time there's a trailer, a TV spot, a clip, like I would just like fully consume it and, you know, maybe look a little too much into everything. And I felt like that probably had an effect on how I felt about the movie because really, if you put the pieces together from the trailers and the clips, you pretty much get the movie. You get a lot of the best lines from the trailers and clips. You get a lot of the best jokes. You pretty much get the entire structure of the film, minus a few parts in like the third act. And it was one of those situations where I was like, okay, well, that was, you know, basically the movie that was advertised. It was not a Last Jedi type experience where my expectations were subverted at every single turn, even after like over analyzing all those trailers and thinking we knew what it was going in. Yeah, I mean, I think this was just like, oh well, yeah, that was pretty much the movie I saw in the promotional materials. Do you feel that at all?
Yeah. I don't think I had really thought of it to like quite to that extent that you just said, you know, but I do think like some of the scenes, and I mean, you know, I'm always like texting that stuff to you, and not that you wouldn't find it anyways, but like I'm always trying to get you to watch that stuff and, you know, wanting to do podcasts about that stuff. So, you know, that probably doesn't help you avoid some things that would not be best for you to see beforehand. But no, I mean, especially with the scenes that they released, like the scene where Han walks out to Enfys and, you know, kind of does that whole, like, we got 30 hired guns down there. That's like one of the best moments.
Yeah.
Some of the conversations he has with Chewbacca, like, oh, you look great for 190 years old, stuff like that. Those are some of the best moments. And even when he sits down to talk to Lando, and he's, you know, it's like the sabak Han situation, like, which I thought was really great, and Alden on the delivery of that, like, it's fine, you know, like that was all that stuff was really, really good. So, you know, maybe not so much. I don't think I really minded the trailers too much. And I don't mind that they released those scenes, but I do think those scenes kind of like gave quite a bit away. But then again, it's not performing at the box office right now the way they hoped it would. So, I mean, from their perspective, it's probably like, we got to put some of the best stuff out there to try to get butts and seats, you know? So I kind of get where they're coming from, but yeah. And I do think too, like, you know, we like yesterday we were texting a bunch about your thoughts on Solo and stuff. And there was a lot of talk, like, in comparison to The Last Jedi and stuff. And I mean, I just think it's like such a different beast from that, you know, that if you kind of were hoping it would be, and I don't think maybe intellectually you were thinking this, but if you were looking for it to be like as ambitious or similarly ambitious, or, you know, to sort of like deconstruct and do new things in the way that movie did, it's definitely probably surely going to be a letdown because it's not even really trying to do any of those things, So then you end up at the question of, does it need to do those things to be good, or does it make it not good if it doesn't do those things? And maybe we're in a different place in terms of the answer to that question, because I don't. That's fine with me, but that being said, is The Last Jedi like a way bigger achievement because it does all this crazy stuff that completely challenges and reinvents like Star Wars? Like, yeah, it's definitely a bigger achievement, but I'm totally fine with just sort of viewing Solo as like a movie that's not trying to do those things, and you just kind of watch it for what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's going to kind of inform my approach to the Star Wars stories, provided they continue, which feels a little up in the air at the moment. Probably too early to say, but I think like I'm definitely 100% gonna stay away from movie clips going forward with those movies. Like I'll still probably do clips for saga films, but for the stories, I think I'm gonna stay away from the TV spots and clips. Like just watch the trailer, get the the feel, the mission statement, and then kind of try my best to stay away from that. But I mean, it's also really hard, like when you're having you're watching Monday Night Raw and there's Solo TV spots every commercial break.
I think you can avoid watching them on YouTube, like seeking them out, but you're definitely going to probably see some in your periphery.
So, and I mean, who knows, like this could change the approach that Lucasfilm takes to like how they market the movies and everything as well. And that's going to evolve as technology and people's use of technology changes and evolves over the years. So I think it will be a totally different experience going into a Star Wars movie 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But
talk some crap about this movie, Ryan. Where are your complaints?
Yeah. All right. Let me tear this movie apart.
Yeah.
Not really. Okay, let's just start with the worst. I think we can agree on this. Doubling down on the choice to bring Darth Maul back. Like, I couldn't believe it when they brought him back in Rebels. I was shocked and appalled.
Yeah, like it was a bad enough idea in Clone Wars. Now you're doubling down on it in Rebels,
And I guess this is tripling down on it. Because I also felt like as bad as it was in Rebels, they wrapped it up in the best way they could. Like twin sons, pretty amazing. Great episode, great scene. It's done. It's over. Exhale. And then this.
6 months later, a year later, yeah, he's back. Right. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Well, and for me too, the thing about it is that like I know certain people, fans who really, really love, and I really, really love the cartoons and books and stuff, but people that really, really love that stuff and view it as like, that's just as much Star Wars to me as the movies, just not quite where I'm at with that. But those people are going to be like, what difference does it make? He's been back all along. But for me, it's like, if he's not back in a movie, he's not totally back. Like that's totally different. I can still watch The Phantom Menace and be like, he was dead in The Phantom Menace. He died in The Phantom Menace. I never see him in another movie again, at least in the movie continuity. Like, that dude is toast. You know what I mean? And I can't really look at it that way anymore. Although this movie's so like pulpy and just like, I don't know, it's so different from like, I still don't think we'll ever obviously see him in a saga film. So like, why would we? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, we definitely won't. But yeah, it's just, that's the thing. It's seeing him in a movie. And then it really deflated me too, because as the credits were rolling, Kevin and I started talking about timeline stuff and I think I mentioned this on the previous show, but I was just thinking like it was like Clone Wars era I guess it is, but like, I don't know what I thought, but I wasn't thinking about the fact that it was, basically like it was Darth Maul at that time, like way after he should have been dead. So that didn't work for me, but
Yeah.
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 That being said, I was sending you some articles yesterday or last night
Yeah.
with Jon Kasdan talking about this choice, and I don't agree with him at all. But
No.
the logic on why they brought him back is, at least I can sort of see where they were coming from, because the idea was like they wanted a phantom. He didn't use these words, Kevin did, but they wanted a sort of phantom menace in the background here, like a larger kind of big bad pulling the strings, so that, you know, when the movie ends, you're thinking like, oh wow, well, we didn't even see really the big gangster. We didn't really see like the big, like, you know, villain. Like, we just got a taste of his underling, you know, Dryden Voss, who was scary enough in his own right, but like, there's a guy who's way worse than him, and we didn't even see him. That was the idea. And it's like, hey, well, let's pull someone from existing canon and storytelling and stuff that really fits that bill. And I think from that perspective, Darth Maul makes sense, because he is scary, he is intimidating, he is somebody who in the Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff, well, in Clone Wars anyways, is involved in that like criminal underground and all that. So it kind of does make sense from a lot of perspectives in that regard. It just, you have to be like willing to say, it's cool that he's not dead, even though he got cut in half in the Phantom Menace. If you're there, like if you look at that and you're like, yeah, I'm totally on board with the fact that that guy who got cut in half and was clearly meant to be dead for 10 years is now alive. If that's not a problem for you, then I think it makes all kinds of sense to bring Darth Maul into this movie in that role. You know what I mean? The problem is I will never be there and never have been there, because have always been like, no, he was cut in half. The intention of that film is that he is dead. And I don't like a cartoon or even a movie like Solo deciding 15 years later, no, he wasn't dead. I don't like that. So that's my problem with it. But just from a pure, like, why did we think it would be a good idea to bring Darth Maul back? It's actually pretty justified, I thought, in his perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that didn't really make me like it, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. So kind of where I'm at with it is it's bad. I don't like it. But I do appreciate, like, this is kind of the first big, well, maybe not, because Rogue One had like Bail Organa and stuff, but like this feels like the biggest pull from the prequel trilogy into the new Disney canon, and I like that. I want to see more prequel stuff appearing in the Disney canon. You know, it's been happening in the books, it's been happening in the comics. We're not really seeing it on screen quite yet, but you know, I mean, this, like, I think one of the probably ask anyone, give me, you know, 3 things from the prequels that define the prequels for you. I think a lot of people would probably say Darth Maul.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a cool pull in that sense. I still just, I can't buy it in the, like, it's weird because you're talking about Star Wars and you're like, I believe all this crap, except I can't believe this. But I just think back to like the spider legs on the trash planet, and I just can't hang.
Yeah, and even plausibility is not really the issue for me, because I think, like, if watching The Phantom Menace in 1999, I thought that film was in any way at all suggesting that maybe he survived, I don't think it would bother me even. I don't think it would bother me. Honestly, I don't think it would bother me at all if I thought that movie was suggesting that Obi-Wan bested but did not kill Darth Maul. The problem is, like, to me, it's just like, I spent years, you know, understanding that Darth Maul had died in that moment. Not because I was wrong, but because that's what the movie put out there, and that was what everybody believed. And then, you know, George Lucas decided, however many years later, like, let's just change that. Let's just go back on that. And, you know, he has the right to do that, and a lot of people love it, so good for them. But for me, it's just like, I can't reconcile the fact that he died the way he did in The Phantom Menace, and he was clearly dead, and then all of a sudden, well, now he's back. You know, I just think it's like bad storytelling and bad. It's just a bad impulse on the part of the creative forces there. That's what I don't like about it. You know, like, The fact that it like doesn't make sense and it's not believable, that's like way less of an issue to me than just you're just taking something like, I don't know, if they went in some new Star Wars movie and just took something from the original trilogy that was clearly stated on film and we're like, well, now we don't like that anymore, so we'll just change it. Like that would drive me crazy, whether it was plausible or not plausible. I think that's the issue.
Sure. I think it also kind of sends the wrong message too, and it plants like these seeds of doubt in the viewer and the fans, because I think with in Avengers Infinity War, they made this very dramatic ending sequence in that film where a lot of characters die, and immediately my reaction was, well, it's superheroes, they're not really dead. It's comic books, like who cares? Like it had zero impact for me, because it's like, well, okay, I'm already thinking about how are they going to bring them back, because I'm so conditioned to that from 20 years of reading monthly superhero comics. Like even when a character dies in the comics, I'm like, oh, I wonder how many issues until they're brought back or whatever. And like once you start going down that path, like it starts to become really meaningless. And I think this is a danger in that, because in Star Wars, Star Wars has a pretty good track record of like of characters dying and it having value and meaning. Like there's not many like pointless deaths in Star Wars. There's not deaths just for like shock value. Like stuff comes back around, whether it's like a Force ghost or the way characters react to something. Like there's some weight and there's some meaning there. And I hope that this doesn't mean like, oh, boo, here's the Emperor again in episode 9, or like, whatever. Oh, well, Snoke got cut in half. Maybe he's going to come back with giant spider legs.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Yeah, I think it sets a really bad precedent.
I think it's an isolated case. I do think we can kind of blame it on George Lucas too. And, we're very pro George Lucas around here. We love that guy, but I don't see, current day storytellers at Disney, at Lucasfilm, making that choice right now. I think that was like very much a George directive, and like, but I just think there's more over there. There's more of a feeling of like, hey, we did this, George did this, like, so it's cool, it's part of it, like it matters, we like it, kind of thing. Whereas I'm like, George did that, it was a mistake, let's forget it ever happened. Let's move on with our lives. That's where I'm at with it. But I don't see, kind of like Rian Johnson or JJ Abrams or people like that, like being like, well, we should do something similar to like what they did with Darth Maul. I don't think that we have to worry about that, but I didn't think we'd have to worry about seeing Darth Maul in a movie either. So who knows?
Yeah.
And I don't want to make the whole episode about Darth Maul, so we should move on. But the other thing that was part of these interviews, and I'll link them in the show notes, is this idea that like Darth Maul was underutilized or like kind of a wasted character in the Phantom Menace. That drives me nuts too. And it's always been something that bothers me about the way he's been used in Clone Wars and Rebels, because I feel like to a large extent, they took the character of Darth Maul from the Phantom Menace and said, let's like take that visual, like let's take that character, that name, and that backstory and whatever, and let's like make a completely different character, because there's very little in common with the silent but deadly Darth Maul of the Phantom Menace and then the Darth Maul that shows up in Clone Wars and Rebels. To me, it's like they're so different. It's like a totally different character, and it drives me crazy too, this idea that like, oh well, he was only in the movie a little bit and then he died, so that was a waste of a great character. No, that's what made him a great character. The fact that he didn't do anything, like he did things, but that he didn't say much, and that he was this like violent, scary presence in the film. That was what was awesome about it. So the idea that like, well, now we've got to make him a gangster overlord, and it's like, what? That has not.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway,
I feel you. I feel you on
so
that.
I just have a different vibe on Darth Maul than I guess a lot of people do.
Yeah, but like, we're very on the same page here, and obviously, like, you were annoyed by it in your first viewing, but it didn't ruin the movie for you. It ruined the movie for me on my first viewing. That's like how much like it bothered me, which is ridiculous, but it was a 30-second scene. But oh god, the part where even like the reveal is so bad. We are going to move on, but like he's sitting there and it's like you see the legs and you're like, okay, oh god, what's coming? And then like he pulls the hood off and you're like, oh god, it's Darth Maul. Like this sucks.
Yeah.
And then he like talks and you're like, oh, this sucks. And then he's like pulls out his lightsaber for no reason and like lights it up. It's like, in case you didn't know me, I'm TV's Darth Maul. Like,
totally. Yeah. Remember how cool it was when I turned this thing on in the Phantom Menace? Like that's like what that moment is. Yeah. And yeah. Absolutely. It's pretty bad. So okay. Okay. Last thing I'll say about it is that when I went to see the movie the second time, and I hoping that this is the case for you too, I still obviously really dislike it, but it didn't really bother me or take me out of the experience in the same way it did the first time I watched the movie. Because the first time I watched the movie, I was like, I'm rolling. This is a fun, like Indiana Jones style adventure movie, like whatever. I'm super into it. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's this thing that you never thought you'd have to deal with in a movie that like sucks and it's in your face. And it like totally slammed the brakes on the movie for me. Yeah. Like it took me out of it in a huge way. Yeah. This time around, it was like, okay, brace myself. I know that part I don't like is coming up, but I could just like kind of keep going without having to be like deer in headlights for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, sure. No, that's totally the case. Like I feel like that has been the kind of reoccurring story throughout these Star Wars movies with those like jarring scenes. Like I think the parsec joke in Force Awakens, like when that first happened, I remember being like, oh god, like why? And then like the second time I watched the movie and every subsequent time it's been like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. I think the Pondo Baba
and Dr. Evazan.
Yeah, in Rogue One, I was like, oh god, no. And then okay, it's fine. And then I guess like in The Last Jedi, which I rewatched all the Disney movies this weekend as well. So like this is like very, very fresh. The Leia flying scene, just it's nothing. Like it does not bother me at all. Now it's just part of that movie. So
yeah. I mean, I think this one is consequential to the larger storytelling and narrative in a way that those other things aren't so much, you know. I think the Leia thing is consequential to the overall storytelling in a positive way, but those other things are just like little complaints or whatever. So it's definitely going to sting. It's going to continue to sting more than those things. But the overall point you're making, I agree with, which is like there's little things in all these movies that we don't love necessarily, but you know, they shock you the first time, and then after that, you just kind of accept them as part of like the movie that that you like better or whatever. So I was going to say real quick that as far as that parsec thing goes, like they stuck the landing on the parsec joke in this movie so much better than the Force Awakens one.
Yes,
I love that line.
The rounding down.
Yeah, well, just the fact that he's like bragging to some dude who's like sticking hyper fuel into a canister, and he's like, just did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, and then Chewie's like, and then
that was
rounded really down, good. Buddy. And I love he calls him buddy in that moment too. He's like, not if you round down, buddy. That's so good. Yeah. It's really good.
That was really good. I like that a lot. Another like great Twitter take that I saw was the fact that that Rey is the only person in the entire Star Wars universe that cares about Han doing the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. Because like everyone else is like, why are you telling me this in every other scene? Which is pretty great. That's cool. So all right. As far as like actual structure of the movie, I think the pieces fit. I think like the parts work. I did feel with both viewings that the movie dragged in the middle in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. And I think I'm not totally sure. I still need to see the movie more times, but I think for me, what I would have liked is I would have liked the train job sequence to be shorter. I think that's probably the most bland sequence in the film, and it feels like it goes on too long. And it's kind of the least Star Wars part of it. Like it's a very like Western thing. It's something they did on Firefly. It's something that we've seen in like a ton of like video games. It's like that is the least interesting scene to me, and it goes on for a long time, and a lot of it is just kind of dull action. You get a little bit of character building and like plot progression there in like the obviously the bit with Val, even though I don't feel like that had the impact that it should have. But also I think the big part there is the conflict with Memphis Nest and the death of Rio Durant, which also gives Han the opportunity to show off his piloting skills. So I think that's important, and like that should be in there, but I feel like they could have handled that scene better. I think it's one of like the least interesting looking scenes in the movie because it's so many like it's either close shots of people just like on top of metal, or it's like these long shots of just like a train in a mountain, which just it's just not that interesting looking. And I feel like that scene is too long, and I feel like the sabacc scenes are too short.
Okay.
I feel like those are kind of the highlights of the movie, and they're very important, and they go so fast, and like the viewer never really, you don't feel like any real tension because you don't have the game explained to you, which like I don't mean like there should have been a section where Lando's like, okay, here's the rules and like breaks it down. But I think back to the 2006 Casino Royale Bond movie, which has like basically an hour-long card game scene, which is like, people are at the time were like, what is going on? Like Bond movies should be action and like, like womanizing and stuff. And there's like the super long extended card scene. And I don't think it like needs to go that far, but that movie did such a good job of like, even if you didn't play poker, like you learned like to like as a viewer, like you were kind of on the edge of your seat because it like just without saying anything taught you like what was good, what was bad, how like what's going to happen next. It was a lot of like reading the characters' facial expressions. The characters had a chance to really like emote and bluff and give the poker face and all of that, and it was like this really interesting scene. And I think that could have been like, I would have loved to have seen that extended in Solo, because the tension, like we get a taste of the tension between Han and Lando and them like trying to figure each other out. We get a taste of that, but then we also there's so much good stuff happening in the periphery of that scene with like all these like creatures and, there's a lot of humor there, and I would have loved to have seen more of that. And I think I wish the movie, and this is me putting words in the creators' mouths, and this is just my feeling on it. Like I wish the movie would have had the confidence to have a shorter action scene and a longer hanging out at the table playing cards scene, because we talk about like how this movie is like a more personal, a more intimate, a less epic, less action packed movie, and like we were ready to accept it, but they still, like, it almost seems like they wanted it both ways in this film, with like some of the long action scenes. And I think the Kessel Run scene, all of that, I think is totally fine. And like the action makes sense and it's paced super well. I just think the train scene kind of felt like action for action's sake. And I feel like that energy and effort could have been spent in a better way.
Okay. Wow. A lot there. I don't think I disagree too much. Pretty much agree with all of that. But I would say that like a couple things. Well, number one, the Vandor is the planet where the Conviex train heist thing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that planet is attractive looking, or like is compelling in establishing shots. But then once they get down into that sequence, it's just like gray everywhere, or white and gray, because like you're down in, but like seeing those clouds like peeking up, like, or I mean the mountains peeking up through the clouds and like the, the bluish sky and all that, like that's actually, it looks pretty cool. But yeah, like in that sequence, I don't think there's much that's too appealing about that, visually speaking. And then I do like that sequence. I don't think it is very long, but it doesn't really matter if it is long or not. If it feels long, like if it feels too long, then that's what matters. But I remember on my second viewing watching it being like, wow, that's actually like, it happens pretty early in the movie, and then like it's really not that lengthy. You know what I mean? So that was kind of my feeling about it watching it a second time. I think that we're going to hear a lot of Val was wasted and Rio was wasted commentary going forward, because they're, they die early on in the movie. But I think both of those characters were really, really great. And the only kind of complaint I have about the Val situation is that I feel like Beckett doesn't like the amount of time that's given to like his reaction to that makes it seem almost like he's sad for like a couple hours, and then like it doesn't, you don't feel the lasting impact of her death as the movie goes on Beckett. I think you should, and I think they meant for us to, but I don't really feel that lasting impact of her death, because I think like for Han to see, like, here's somebody who maybe he says he didn't trust Val, but like here's somebody who like made a connection with somebody else and they lost that person, and that like broke him. So I don't want that to happen to me. That seems like something that a young Han Solo would see and react to and would have some meaning, but it doesn't really come across that way in the movie. It comes across more like, man, I'm really sad for this guy, but he moved on pretty quick. That's the feeling I get with Val's death.
Yeah. And I think like I'm okay with Beckett's character being like, well, that sucks. But I never fully invested myself in this person, because I don't fully invest myself in anyone. So it's easy for me to move on. But he doesn't, like, I think he could have, like, in a couple lines have communicated that, but we're not really sure how to feel, because it's not his reaction isn't well explained. Like I would be totally fine with him being like, even like, I'm handling this, I'm dealing with it in my own way, we have to like move on with the mission, or being like, this is why you don't get close to people. Like if he had given like one way or another in just one line to like explain his feelings, but instead you get like this weird sucker punch moment that like in the theater, like there were like a couple nervous laughs, because it's so weird. Like when he just punches Han, and then it becomes a joke like 1 minute later.
Well, it's like Beckett's death too. Like Han kills him, and on the one hand it's like a big moment because it's like him deciding like, well, I'm gonna look out for myself before anybody else. On the other hand, they're so friendly about the fact that he just killed him, in his death and stuff. Like I don't dislike that part. Like, and I think it's cool that like Han like cradles him as he's dying, and like it's like two outlaws looking at each other and saying like, this is just the way it had to go, no hard feelings. Like I'm fine with all that, but it's also this thing where it's like I guess like you said, you're not really sure how to feel, because on the one hand, it's like it's supposed to be this big moment and really impactful, but then the way it's played is like, and weirdly, the only death that is sort of like they try to play up for a lot of emotional value is L3's death.
Yeah.
And that one I don't feel like, I don't think that's badly done either. Like, you know, I like that line where she's like, "What's happening, Lando?" And, you know, it's good, but even that, I don't feel like this big emotional, you know, kind of impact or anything. But all that being said, like I guess like to me, I recognize that, and like I can criticize that, but I also like it doesn't really bother. Like it doesn't really take away from my enjoyment of the movie.
Yeah.
I think that the intention of this movie is to be light and to keep moving, and I don't think for the most part we're really supposed to be like just, you know, heartbroken about Val's death or even Beckett's death, or, you know, I don't think that stuff is really supposed to affect us all that much. You know, it's like when a character dies in Indiana Jones, and I'm a broken record here and probably not very very original or creative and continually going back to Indiana Jones, but just like tonally
it's appropriate in this case.
I think so, because, you know, like you don't expect a death in an Indiana Jones movie to have like all this weight like it would in a Star Wars saga movie either, you know. Like it's not going for that, and I think that's the case with these movies too. But real quick too, before we get into some more complaints, I just want to say like I'm noticing like a reoccurring motif here, I think, in our discussion throughout the whole thing of like this idea of like, you know, did we get enough of something? Was it in there enough versus like overstaying its welcome and being in there too much? You know, because like a lot of this stuff is reminding me of Darth Maul. Like people complain about Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace, and it's a different situation, but people complain about him like, oh, he was underused, he wasn't in there enough, you know. And I can see people saying that about like Rio or Val and like, you know, stuff like that. Like, oh, like Val's such a great character, Rio's such a great character, they should have been in the movie more. But like I'm really very okay with characters having a certain purpose in a film. If they're a great character, like I don't think we should look at it like what matters is how much time they're on screen. I think it should be like what matters is how well written were they, how well performed were they, and how well did they serve their purpose in the story. You know, you can have a character who shows up only in the last 20 minutes, or, you know, is only in the beginning, like Laura Santeca. Laura Santeca rules. Like I love Laura Santeca in The Force Awakens. No part of me has ever said like, oh, but they wasted him, he was only in it for 10 minutes. Like that's not how storytelling works, I feel like, you know.
Well, I mean, this was a conversation we just had in 2015 about Luke Skywalker in The Force Awakens.
Yeah, totally. He's got probably more impact by being in that movie for that little time. So you know, and I think that, you know, with Val specifically, there's issues of representation and stuff, and I'm sympathetic towards that, and I think that's a legitimate argument for sure. But I also think like Val's a great character, and the way she is used in the story to tell the story is, I think, really good. So, you know, that's where I'm at with that whole thing. But sorry, as far as that goes too, same thing with the Sabacc versus the train heist, you know, like it's like, oh, the Sabacc stuff is so good, but it wasn't used enough. But like there's, you know, I'm sure there's a better, like they could have given us more Sabacc and it would have been great. But then there's also that danger of like, is it great because it's like this quick thing and it's like really, you know, light and boom and you're in and you're out? Is that what makes those Sabacc scenes great? Versus like those aliens in that Sabacc scene, like they are so good, they are fantastic. But like all of a sudden, if we get like 2 minutes of cutaways to aliens, like
I'd be okay with that.
I probably would too, but I'm just acknowledging like there's a chance that stuff can overstay its welcome.
Get rid of the cage fighting robots and give us 2 minutes of establishing shots of aliens hanging out.
Yeah, maybe, but see, that's another thing too with the train heist versus Sabacc. You know, I'm not sure it's completely solid ground to stand on to be like, because there's a significant amount of Convoy X scene, we have less Sabacc. Like,
no,
you know what I mean? Like, they could have just given us more Sabacc. They don't really have to like cut the train sequence. You know, I don't think that they necessarily are.
But like what it comes back to is like I was kind of discussing my general feeling of how the movie dragged.
Okay.
And I felt that a bit in my first viewing, and I feel like I was able to like pin it down in my second viewing, and I think it's the train heist. Okay. And then it's also like the feeling of like wanting the Sabacc to last longer. But
yeah, no, I can probably definitely agree with both of those things. I don't mind the train sequence, but it's probably the least visually interesting and probably the least fun of all the big sequences in the movie. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just talking about like the weight of the emotion and stuff, like it is kind of weird. It was the it's the first of the Disney Star Wars movies that when that credit sequence rolls, I wasn't wiping away little tears.
Yeah.
Like there's no real point in this movie where I like teared up or felt like really strong emotion, which is fine because it's a Han Solo movie. You don't cry at a Han Solo movie. Like that makes sense, but it is kind of like an interesting experience after like just how emotionally draining the last three movies have been in like the first theater experience. Like basically like Force Awakens, basically from the point that like Han dies, like I'm a mess. Like in my first viewing. And then, I think Last Jedi basically as from the point where it's not even like when Luke dies, but when it's the point where Rey and Leia are talking, that's what gets me every time. And then going from that to the we have everything we need, to the the kids telling the story, like, oh, just a mess.
Yeah.
And then the last like I don't know half hour of Rogue One basically. But yeah, like this was a very different experience because it was just like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, for sure.
I don't know. Was there anything that like really affected you emotionally in Solo?
No. No, I don't think so. But well, no. Not in terms of like feeling sad or feeling like overwhelmed, like with that kind of emotion, but like there was stuff in here that affected me emotionally in terms of like I felt like joy and like excitement and like cracking up, like the Sabacc scene. Oh my god, man! Between me and Kevin, I think we talked about it in the other episode, but like between the guy with the alien, the pod racer guy with all the eyeballs, like and that moment, like we were. My wife was annoyed because like we were laughing so hard, and then it cuts to the guy biting his fingernails. Like I was just, I mean, that was one of the that emotional high watching the movie like rivals most of the stuff in Force Awakens or Last Jedi for me. But obviously it's not like a heavy emotion thing, but that's emotion still. But that's not exactly what you were asking, I guess. But
yeah, the shower scene as well was
good.
Pretty great.
And I think like I guess we're still in our complaint section, but
yeah, we're complaining a lot.
I know. Well, but the introduction of Chewbacca and the whole thing, like Han saving Chewbacca.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the fact that they didn't do this giant, like, oh my God, Chewbacca is so indebted to Han Solo, like types thing. Like it was like they were both in trouble. They just helped each other out. And I think it was like a really solid beginning to a friendship. And I don't like the idea that like Chewbacca is like this, like, I don't know, inferior like person to Han Solo that like owes everything to Solo and I'm so grateful to you and indebted to you. It's the way this movie presents it as more of like they're indebted to each other, you know what I mean, like to a certain, or just that they just found a way to work together, you know what I mean. That's really what it is in that scene, and I love that.
I think that relationship plays out really well. Like it was a little weird like at first, where I was like, wait, this is how they're introducing them to each other? They're like fighting in a mud pit? Like, okay, but now I'm like, okay, well, that's how they met. Like, it's one of those things that you're like, okay, well, that's how it happened. So you just move on. Yeah. Okay. So I think like my last complaint is nothing to do with the film itself, more of its placement. I feel like there would have been a better reaction to this film from me and from a lot of people, and maybe box office and everything, um, if it would have come after Force Awakens instead of Rogue One.
Okay.
I think Rogue One set a different type of bar for the saga films than we were really expecting.
The
Um,
standalones.
yeah, the standalones, the stories. Sorry, because I think like I was, I was when the standalones were announced, what I was expecting was basically what we got with Solo, like just a like fun side story, kind of like a theatrical version of like, I don't know, like three Rebels episodes put together, like basically that. Um, filling in some gaps, having a good time, whatever. Maybe it's like a novel or like a Star Wars video game that's, telling this story. It's not like a huge impactful thing, whatever. But then I think um like I don't know, like I think like Rogue One was way, way better than a lot of us expected. And even just like rewatching the film last night, like I like it's a beautiful movie. It's like so full of weight and emotion, and like it's so great that I think we kind of got two like heavy Star Wars movies in a row with Rogue One and then Last Jedi, and then Solo felt kind of weird after that. And I think if we would have gotten it after the lighter Force Awakens, like it would have, I think it would have just fit better. And obviously that was the original plan, but then Larry Kasdan went full time on Force Awakens, and it threw like the Solo schedule off by a ton.
Mhm.
um so but I think like that was the original plan, and if they would have stuck that original plan, I think it would have felt a lot better.
Yeah. I think Josh Trank getting removed from the supposed Boba Fett movie impacted all that stuff too,
Oh, that's true.
a little bit, but maybe not. I don't know. Now I'm second guessing myself as I say that, because the first future filmmakers panel at Celebration was going to be Josh Trank and Gareth Edwards. It's still, like Solo was not on the docket there. So maybe that's, I
Yeah.
think you're right about the Larry Kasdan thing actually, kind of being what really kind of changed the schedule for this one too. Yeah, I think you're right about that. Although I do think Rogue One would feel kind of weird now after Last Jedi in May, like 5 months later. This like also this heavy film and all that. I think that
It's
would have
true.
also felt weird,
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I don't think like I'm still kind of just developing how I feel about this, or like my kind of like my thoughts on this whole issue. But it's
Hmm.
interesting because when Lord and Miller got fired, it felt like this situation where like I was never super necessarily on board with Lord and Miller. I don't know. I think I just didn't like, I wasn't like a Lego movie fan or whatever, and I hadn't seen those 21 Jump Street movies. So I was
Hmm.
kind of like, well, okay, that I know that Lego movie humor is pretty slapsticky and like pretty like they push it, like for sure.
Yeah.
And so I was a little nervous about that going into this movie. And then, some of the rumors about like the Ace Ventura thing and all that, like who knows like what the truth is as far as all that stuff goes. But
Yeah.
anyway, what my preamble is working up toward here is now seeing the movie, like some of my favorite parts of the movie are the goofiest parts. And
Uh-huh.
part of me feels a little bit like this movie would be more successful if they leaned into that more, because
Hmm.
even though it's a lower stakes, lighter movie, I do think that they were reticent to push it too far away from like I don't know, the like Star Wars, not the formula, because it does move away from the formula, but
Yeah.
I just think that it could have been lighter, it could have been funnier, it could have been, you know, goofier. And if we had a little more of that stuff, like it might have developed a more of its own. Because I mean, because part of it is like, you know, like you walked out of there and you're like, I mean, in comparison to Last Jedi, Force Awakens, and Rogue One, this is not nearly as good. I think that's like a huge part of your complaint, right? Is it just doesn't stack up to those other three movies, in your opinion? But I think if it would have moved further away from what those movies are by doubling down on like the lightness and the goofiness more so than it did, that might not have been really kind of where your feelings went. You know what I mean? Like you maybe wouldn't have felt as inclined to like, because really at the end of the day, there is as much in common with those movies as there is different, you know, between this and those movies. So if it's just more of a different beast, I don't know. I'm just thinking about that scene with Lady Proxima and like him like holding the stone in his hand and then making the noise to like arm it. Yeah. It's fantastic. And she's like, you just made that noise with your mouth. I mean, it's so funny.
Yeah.
But like that and some of the other really goofy stuff like that, those are like the exceptions in this movie, not like the more consistent tone throughout it. And I just wonder what this movie would feel like and what our reaction would be if it just straight up was way different, you know? And
yeah,
I think it's just a little tweaking, like a little more of that goofy kind of stuff. And because I keep comparing it to Indiana Jones, but at the end of the day, I don't think it is as lighthearted and as adventurous and as like quick as an Indiana Jones movie. Yeah. And I think because they're trying to kind of bring those things into a Star Wars thing. Same thing with Rogue One. I mean, apparently Rogue One originally was really different from Star Wars, and they got scared and thought like, or maybe it just wasn't good. I don't know, but they thought like, we got to push this more toward a traditional kind of Star Wars story rather than just like gritty war movie. And I'm about 100% sure that I like Rogue One better as what they turned it into than I would have if it were just some gritty war movie. But I don't feel that confident that I like Solo, a Star Wars story, as it is now better than I would if it was more like Han Solo making a clicking noise with his mouth and weird aliens biting up all their fingernails. Like if that was more of the vibe in the movie, I might like it more than I do with the more steadied, conservative Ron Howard spin on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if there is a bit of regret at Disney right now and at Lucasfilm, wondering like, again, like the box office stuff, like it really doesn't, I mean, it kind of matters to us as fans, but like, I don't want to be like an armchair philosopher on this, but you know, I mean, I think it's unavoidable that the headlines right now, the conversation about this movie is that it's underperforming. And I think a lot of the conversation is also that Deadpool 2 is overperforming and is doing really well. And I wonder if like there are some people like at Lucasfilms like, man, maybe we should have kept this a bit more irreverent and goofy, because that turns out that's what people are in the mood for right now. And I think if the conversation around Solo wasn't, I mean, I feel like the conversation is mostly positive from people who've seen it, but like a lot of that I've seen is like, yeah, it's pretty good, and there's a lot of shout outs to EU stuff. Like that's a lot of the conversation, but I think if the conversation was like, this movie is hilarious, like that would be the word of mouth that they'd probably want a bit more than like, oh, it references these books from the early 80s. Like
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that being said, I think you're right. I do think, I totally think you're right. But I kind of feel like too, with this opening weekend box office numbers thing, I don't really feel like it's a reflection of what's in the movie. Because like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like people were that excited for the movie going into it, and not because of what it is, but, or because of like you know, the tone of the movie or anything, but just more like we just had a Star Wars movie, like, and I don't know. I think it's a number of things, but you know, if it falls off a cliff after this weekend, I think we could say like, hey, people are not really responding and all that stuff. But right now, I feel like it's more just I think it's a lot of things, but I think release date, I think proximity to The Last Jedi, the negative like kind of production story associated with it. I don't think that helped at all. I think it's just a lot of things, you know, that are kind of
middling Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic scores.
Yeah, that probably doesn't help.
I mean, it's a factor. It's not like it's not one thing. Like,
right.
But yeah,
I think I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we'd probably be in a very similar box office situation no matter what the movie was. But I guess if it was like just knockout, like just drop dead hilarious, then maybe those Rotten Tomato scores would be better. Pre-buzz going into the movie would be better.
I mean, I saw, like, I was not like day one pre-order tickets for the Lego movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't really care. I didn't even like see a trailer for that movie, but I saw people on Twitter being like, this movie is hilarious. Like, it's so funny, like, and so weird. And like, there's so much like humor for adults and kids in here. And then like, I was like, really? The Lego movie? And then like I hopped over to Rotten Tomatoes and it had like a 90-something%. I was like, okay, I guess I'll go see this movie. Like, and I think that, you know, people who were maybe indifferent about Solo, if they heard like this movie's hilarious, it's so funny, that you won't believe like the humor in this, and then like, you know, and then if critics responded to it as well, I think that like 1-2 punch would have brought a lot of people on the fence into the theater. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's getting pretty well received from Star Wars fans with like a few exceptions. Like, I mean, I follow a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans on Twitter, and I think it's mostly well received. I'm not seeing a lot of return viewers. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people being like, yeah, this movie was fun. I don't think I need to see it again in the theater, or like just not discussing going and seeing it again. Whereas like with the last three, I feel like people are like, all right, this was something else. Now I'm going again tomorrow, and I'm going again the next day.
Yeah. I mean, on the Blockade Runner Twitter account, I follow a pretty, like a lot of podcasters and people like that. And like, I'm definitely seeing like quite a few, like, here's a picture of me outside the theater at viewing number 4. Like, I'm seeing a lot of that kind of stuff, but like the demographic I'm talking about here is such a, like, you're talking like a couple hundred people probably in the world that like fall into this, like, sure. I do a Star Wars podcast and I go see the movie 5 times opening weekend. Like, I don't think that's making an impact on the overall box office or anything. Right. But I do like those same people who are like, you know, the Blast Points guys or whatever. Like, I'm pretty sure they're all going to see it like a billion times this weekend. And, you know, I got out to the theater twice. You got out to the theater twice. Dan got out to the theater twice in the course of 3 days. I mean, Dan went twice in 1 day, basically, like in a 24-hour period. He saw the movie twice. So, but, you know, how does that, when you talk about like, you know, friends of ours and like family members and just other people we know that, you know, like Star Wars on a more casual level. So, but then I don't know, I've heard some people too, like people I work with and stuff being like, I don't really watch Star Wars movies. I don't really know anything about them, but I don't know, maybe this one is one I could go see kind of thing. So I hope that maybe helps it a little bit too, because it's just so, you don't need to know anything about, I've been telling people that have asked me, you know, more just general people that aren't Star Wars people, like, this is a great one, I feel like, to go see. It's not necessarily super emblematic or representative of what like a Star Wars movie is, but it's also like, you don't need to know a single thing about Star Wars to enjoy this movie. Like, you could just go watch it and be like, cool, like, here's a story about a kid from a planet who runs away and there's a girl and there's a heist, and, you know, you don't need to know anything about the Force or any kind of lore or anything like that. So I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah. But I guess too, and we should talk quickly here about the stuff we really like in the movie also.
Oh my
Although our complaint section really has not been very negative here, which is a good thing, I think. I should say too that I do appreciate, as much as I'm like, man, this movie maybe could have been funnier and lighter, and maybe that would have been a good thing for this movie. I do appreciate that there is at Lucasfilm and Disney an emphasis on a desire to a willingness to like kind of have a consistency and sort of quality bar for Star Wars movies that they seem like intent on living up to. You know what I mean? Like they were willing to do what they had to do with Rogue One to get it to the place they thought it needed to go. And with this movie, I mean, I don't know how accurate the numbers we're seeing are, but I think they spent a lot of money to go back and make this movie something that they thought was worth putting out under the Star Wars, name. And as much as I'm looking at like funny moments in the movie, thinking those are Lord and Miller influenced and wanting more of that, I don't doubt that the movie was in big trouble with where it was at last summer when they decided to make the call to, change directors. Like, I don't think it's just like they didn't get along with them, so they thought they'd fire him, and really they had this really great movie. I'm sure there were pretty big problems, and I think like they have spent a ton of money to do what they thought was correcting the course for this movie, and I think this movie could have been funnier, but like I also kind of fear the idea that they're like, oh, this just makes like this crazy Star Wars, and like I'm kind of afraid of the idea of going to a movie theater and watching a Star Wars movie and having it be like, that doesn't feel Star Wars to me at all. You know what I mean? So I think it's like a very delicate balance. And I guess my point here is that they don't seem to take that responsibility lightly. And
sure,
it could be that sometimes they're erring a little bit too much on the conservative side as far as that stuff goes, but I'm glad they care. You know what I mean? And I do, like, I have a level of preciousness with Star Wars where, it's like, well, okay, if Deadpool had not worked, like, I don't know, there's so many Marvel characters, and Marvel is just like this larger brand of superheroes, and there's a lot of variety in that. And it's like, I think you have more room to put out a movie that doesn't work in that kind of, universe, versus like right now, Star Wars is something that people hold really dear. And, people will disagree about the prequels, and The Last Jedi, I guess, but I feel like there's a certain vibe and mentality, and there's certain non-negotiables with Star Wars that I think I want to see protected. And maybe I'm willing to sacrifice a few laughs in Solo to err on the side of making sure a Star Wars movie still feels in important ways like a Star Wars movie. So
yeah, we'll probably never know. I want to see that Lord and Miller cut.
And we got to say too, like, Lawrence Kasdan has written some very funny scripts and some very funny lines too. So it is maybe a little bit jumping the gun to be like, oh, all these funny moments are those deserve, like, the credit goes to Lord and Miller. Like, that's not necessarily the case, but and I'm not that familiar with their work, but I do feel like I can see certain moments where it's like, that seems like that would have come from those guys, Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about the positives. What are the things you really like about this movie, Ryan?
I think number one, probably my favorite part of the movie is Kira. I think like her arc in the movie is just great. Like, I think she's definitely the most complicated, most conflicted character. She's the hardest one to read throughout. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance to like her interactions with Han and with Dryden, and I mean with everyone, even with Lando. And she's, as we eventually find out, like, she's playing a bit of a long con in she like kind of self-motivated, I guess, like, and I think that her arc is just incredibly interesting. I think they handled her with a lot of care and didn't. I'm so glad you mentioned that one of those like last scenes where Han is hesitating before he gets on the elevator, and it shows her facing him with like this huge open space behind her, and you were expecting like a Michael Myers Dryden Voss moment where she gets killed. But I'm so glad that they continued to handle that character with care, and she's her own person that's not just a motivator for Han in the movie. And obviously, aside from the mall stuff, like I really, really like how her story ends and like the conflict within her.
Well, and we knew that she had to disappoint Han or double cross Han in some way, because I think that's just part of who that character is in A New Hope. Is you feel like he's been burned. So for him to have this great romance with Kira and have it like not turn out badly, I don't think he ends up in the place he is, even if it's like, oh, she had just tragically died, like Val had. I don't know, he'd be sad, you know what I mean? More so than like, I feel like it's got to be kind of the way it was, but they did it in a way where, if it had just been like, oh, we're going to villainize her because she turns out to be awful and she turns her back on him. Like, that's not nearly as good as the way it was done, which is, she does turn her back on him. She does double cross him, but she does it in a way that's like shows genuine empathy and like caring for Han Solo. You know what I mean? So like, she's not relishing in the fact that she just like turned her back. And in fact, she saves his life too before she does it. So, and it's not even so much turning on him, but it's definitely, disappointing him and not being willing to kind of give him, the relationship and stuff that he wants, because she chooses her own interests over his. So, but it's never in a way that, like, to me, it doesn't villainize her at all.
No.
And,
and there's also like a part of it, like, did she even really have a choice?
Vilify is the word I was looking for there, not villainize. Yes. But yes, does she even have a choice? Yeah, totally.
Like, or is she just like, she like the part where she's like, I want to like go on these like fun adventures with you, and all this romance, and all this, and be so free. Like, I want that, but like, I'm branded. Like, this is my situation now. I love how none of that is like over explained. I'm sure we're going to get like a comic or a novel or something at some point that's going to fill those blanks in, which is cool. It's fine. But like, I think that arc is so good, and like the moment where she makes the choice and just like, just walks by the diamonds or whatever that they were going to sell, and gets the ring, and like that's such like a powerful, strong moment, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had the worst premonition though of like, you've seen in Clone Wars when Darth Maul kills Satine in front of Obi-Wan.
Yes.
I just had the worst premonition of a similar moment in a Solo 2, like Darth Maul like killing Kira, like ooh. No.
Yeah. They gotta be better than that.
Yeah.
We can't have that.
All right, what else?
What else is good? Enfys Nest. That was a good surprise.
It was, and it worked so much better for me though on the second viewing. The first time I was a little like flabbergasted, like, wait, what's going on here? Like, the villain's not even the villain, and there's just a lot going on at the end of the movie where it didn't all work out to me, like make sense to me. But like on a second viewing, I was like, yeah, this is great. Like, I actually love the character overall. I love the surprise, and I love the fact that like, because this is not this epic like good versus evil story, like you don't necessarily have to have this like big bad like character. Like, so we have a fun sequence or two with Enfys Nest as that sort of like masked villain character, but in the end, like, it's not even what she is, and we didn't need to have that.
No, that's great. Yeah, like,
but you get to have some fun with that before you find out that's not what it is. So
yeah, total subversion of expectations. I like the greater her playing part in like the bigger like something that's been great about like the Disney era of Star Wars is like, we've gotten so many pieces of how the rebellion was built, and that it was not just this like overnight thing. We know, part of it is Rogue One, part of it is Star Wars Rebels, and part of it is also Enfys Nest. And I think that's really cool to see, like, this is another piece of this like greater story of the rebellion being built, that there's also like, hey, there's also this swoop gang who is doing like this Robin Hood stuff to work towards like overthrowing the empire.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I think that's great. Like it's great in the context of Solo. It's great in the context of the larger Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with my brother yesterday, though, because he went and saw the movie this weekend, and he was like, I think there's gonna be some confusion for people in terms of that whole rebellion thing that are not following like Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff like that. Because to me, I was like, oh, here she is, Enfys Nest, somebody who's contributing to the creation of a rebellion, and she tells Han like, hey man, there's a rebellion out there, like, this is going to help the rebellion and all that stuff. And like, I think my little brother, he looked at it like, okay, so this is supposed to be like the beginning of the rebellion, like, and like Han, like it was, he thought his criticism, which makes sense, was that it's like trying too hard to connect everything. So like all of a sudden the Han Solo story, which is light and inconsequential, except for, to Han as a character, all of a sudden that is now like the cornerstone of the rebellion. Like that would be awful if that's what it was supposed to be. And I think like general audiences, it totally makes sense that they might look at it that way and feel like, oh, so wait a minute, like Han Solo is supposed to be like instrumental in forming the rebellion because he gives this hyper fuel to Enfys Nest. And I think, if you follow that stuff, it's more like, no, this is just one small cell that, makes up a larger whole that's like, helping out the rebellion. But I think that's easily misunderstood by a general audience.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like I think like you also have, but you've at this point, like theoretically, you've seen Rogue One, so about like Saw Gerrera and like his group.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And I mean, I don't know if they're going to continue building on this, but like I feel like, I mean, I guess like the biggest piece that's probably missing for general audiences is the Rebels piece, which Rebels I think is kind of like the mortar to all of these different bricks, because Rebels, the entire focus is like, we're bringing these different parts together. And like, if Rebels was still airing, I was talking to Lindsay about this, there would have totally been, in season 5, there would have totally been an Enfys Nest episode. Like Hera would have totally met up with Enfys Nest at some point.
Well, I think Enfys Nest is like a perfect character for a cartoon or something like that, though. Like it's a young adult protagonist or young adult character or whatever. Like it's visually interesting. It doesn't have that much consequence to the larger narrative, so you can have as much fun with it as you want, I feel like. I don't think that's in the cards, but I could see a toy line around Enfys Nest, a cartoon, like all that stuff.
Forces of Destiny. I think we'll see Enfys Nest in Forces of Destiny,
and that'd be great. And but I think the unfortunate truth here is that I don't think that's making that big of a splash or having that much of an impact. I mean, it's not very ambitious either, Forces of Destiny, in terms of like what it is, like these little 2-3 minute things. But I don't know that there's a lot of like, I don't know. I like those toys didn't sell very well. And I don't know. I don't think, I think they could do more than just that with Enfys Nest. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Would have a bigger reach for sure.
I don't want to go down a Forces of Destiny rabbit hole now, but are you reading the comic book?
I'm not. No.
Are you? Okay. Order the trade from on Amazon, IDW. It's like $10.
It's already out? There's already a trade out?
Okay. It's like 5 or 6 issues. The comic is so good.
Okay.
It's like gorgeous. There's different artists, but like it looks so good. I think it actually works. Those stories work better in comic form than in kind of like that Flash animation style. I highly, highly recommend, especially if you like Star Wars adventures. It's very similar in vibe to that, but like I think like it's really great. So
Okay, I will do. And for the record, I really like Forces of Destiny. It's not a criticism of it. It's
yeah,
just a acknowledgement that I don't think there's a big reach with that. I don't think a lot of people are watching it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I love Forces of Destiny, but I think I actually love the comic more than
Cool.
the shorts. So, okay, I think there's still a ton we could talk about. I feel like we can have more, like there's going to be more conversations about the box office, what this means for future stories. I think we'll get announcements one way or another about stories. I think that's a conversation to have. I also think we should do our official guide / art book episode, because I think there's a ton to talk about in those. I read through both this weekend for Solo, and there's still a lot of conversation here, but I think it's probably time to wrap up. I can see things are needing to wrap up on your end.
Yeah. Apparently there's a big dead bird in our backyard that got eaten up by a coyote that I'm supposed to go clean up.
Great.
So, yeah, we've got a couple of coyotes in the backyard all of a sudden. So that's interesting. Yeah. Let me just throw a shout out real quick to the Kessel Run scene. I was so I expected it to be good, but I was so pleasantly surprised by like how fun and low stakes it was. I mean, it's in some ways it's huge stakes because like they almost die and like it's crazy, like giant monster and all that. But I don't know, as soon as I started hearing like, oh, they're gonna explain the Kessel Run and all that, like I thought it was gonna be a major focus in the movie and it was gonna be this big deal. And it's like it was such a fun little moment in the original trilogy, and we don't need to see it over explained. And to me, it was just like, actually, it's just this thing where you gotta sneak your way through some space cloud monster rocks, and like it just, it was. I just thought the way they did it was perfect, and on paper, I just never would have thought it would have worked, and I thought it was actually so much fun. So it didn't overstay its welcome. They didn't try to make it more important than it was. I just thought it was perfect.
Totally. And I think like it's really cool in the official guide. There's like the diagram of the Kessel Run. There's like this over the top map where it's like, this is the way you should go through the Kessel Run, and this is how long it takes. And then there's like Han's Run, which is like right through the middle of like the Mao and all that stuff. Like, it's great. Like it totally makes sense. And I like that section.
Cool. Okay. Well, as you said, I guess we're about out of time here, and we've been going on for a while. So we will no doubt be talking Solo more. We'll talk books. Maybe we'll have other people on talking about their reactions to Solo. And Ryan, I think we should definitely both read Most Wanted by Ray Carson, especially with you being like a big Kira person.
Yes.
I recently finished Last Shot. So.
Oh, nice. I still have to wrap that one up. I'm pretty close. I actually looked for that YA book when I was getting my art book and official guide, and they didn't have it at Barnes & Noble.
Oh, bummer. Okay.
Yeah, so I have to order it off Amazon, whatever.
All right.
But yeah, I want to read that for sure.
Alrighty. Well, until we come back with more of this promised Solo content, you can follow us at our blog, which is blockaderunnerpodcast.com. Email us at blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the show out there, or on the show, on the movie out there. So you can always send those in at blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you're using the Anchor app, which we recently moved our podcast to, you could send us a voicemail through there, but I think that's a pretty limited number of people. But check that out if you're looking for a new podcast app. It's pretty cool in some ways, so you could give that a shot. We're on YouTube, of course. There'll be a link to that. Twitter at Blockade Run. Ryan, your Twitter?
At Brandwarf, BRAWNDWARF.
Instagram, The Blockade Runner, and I don't know. Those are all the places you can find us, but links to all of those at blockaderunnerpodcast.com.
And one more thing. We're going to be talking about Solo a lot in the next few episodes, probably. But 1994 is coming.
Yeah, power of the 90s, the power of the 90s. Yes, it's going to be coming back in June for sure, and hopefully we can do a couple of those consistently.
Yeah, I'm gonna order my copy of The Courtship of Princess Leia.
Oh, okay.
And I already have TIE Fighter installed on my computer. So
okay. Nice. Okay, time to get to work on prepping for 1994. Sounds good to me. Absolutely cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks very much for listening, and we will be back soon with more Blockade Runner podcast.
Goodbye.